Welcome, I'm Tamara Grand, an abstract painter and mixed media artist. Join me today as I make some wonderfully bright colored collage papers. So I've been getting lots of questions about these collage papers that I've been making, what kind of techniques I'm using, what kind of papers I'm starting with, what my color palettes look like. And I thought I'd just do a little demo here today, and you can follow along, and I'll show you my supplies and I'll show you some of the techniques that I've been trying out and experimenting with on a weekly basis. And when we get done, we'll hope that we have a few nice papers to start collaging with. So I've got a jelly plate here. It's an 8x10 plate. It'd be nice to have a bigger one, but it seems to do its job for me. I use a brayer. This one's about 4 inches. You could use a smaller one, but I find it's the right size for this jelly plate. This week I'm working with a very limited palette. I've got carbon black, Payne's gray, quinacridone, magenta, and a titanium white. They'll be getting lots of different hues and shades from those 4 colors. I've chosen a few fun stencils today because I've got paint on my brain and Valentine's Day is coming up. I've got some X's and O's, so a little bit of graphic text. Then I need something that's small, so I'll go with this honeycomb piece. I may or may not throw some hearts in. It might just be a bit too obvious for me. We'll see when we get there. And then obviously a well-loved mandala. I have quite a few of these stencils and I love starting my paintings with them. Let's put those off to the side. I'll just give you a quick tour of the papers that I'm using this week. I buy a lot of single sheet papers at my local art store. They're rice papers or Japanese papers. This one's got some really interesting embossing on it, so I'm curious to see how it will take the paint. Same with this one here. A little bit thinner, so it's more transparent, more like a tissue paper, but some interesting woven bits of paper in there. This one's very interesting. It's almost like a brownish tissue paper with little bits of wood flecks. And then some basic mixed media paper, very, very lightweight, just from a pad that I have. A little bit of wet strength tissue paper. Oh, an old sewing pattern. Sometimes these lines can make for really interesting backgrounds. A couple of pieces of rice paper. These ones are great because they're really absorbent, so it's easy to get into the holes in the stencils and pick up all the paint. And then just some basic photocopier paper. This is a really good weight to pull a print at the very end, a monoprint, when you want to get rid of all the paint that's on your jelly plate. I'm going to put those off to the side right now. I don't have a huge workspace here, so things may fall on the floor as we get going. We'll see how it goes. And let's move those paints over so they don't cast a shadow. And the paper you're seeing here is the paper that I like to clean my brayer on as I go. And yes, I do end up using that as collage fodder down the road as well. All right, let's get going. I'm going to start with just a little bit of the Payne's gray, and I'm going to move it around on the plate. Just one direction. You probably know this if you've done jelly plate work before, that when you go back and forth over the paint, the brayer just picks it up, which is not what you want. And I'm just going to play with some different ways of applying paint and applying pattern. There's no one right or wrong way. Here we go. Let's just get rid of that extra paint on the brayer and lay down a stencil to start. Now, I often lay down a variety of stencils on the wet paint as I go because I'm going to cut up these pages eventually. Let's try a little bit of the rice paper. Can I find it here? This is the problem with having the camera going. Everything gets in the way. And I'm just going to gently apply that. See how it's picking up the color in between those little honeycomb spots? There we go. These papers are going to be layered, so I will be doing one layer and then I'll let it dry and I'll add something else to it a little bit later on. Let's see if I can get right into those. Excellent, excellent. Doesn't look like much. Let's apply the same paper to this piece at the bottom. Normally I wouldn't do this right away, but hey, why not? I'm curious as to what this interesting mandala will look like on top of the honeycomb. Not much. I'm going to put that one to the side. Come back to it later. I'm going to take those stencils off, and I have got a beautiful pattern left that I'm going to take a piece of cartridge paper and just gently pick up. I want to leave a little bit of it on the plate. A little bit on the plate for later. And that's going to be really nice to do something with once it dries. So let's come back in and add a bit of quinacridone magenta. I'm just going to start with single colors here. I don't want to put a bunch of multiple colors on the plate at the same time yet. We'll work up to that. Okay, so here we go. Let's just get that pink all over. Get rid of that little extra bit here. And all right, well, let's go for the hearts. Let's just go all out here. Go big or go home, right? I want to have room for my X's and O's too, because I'm only going to do one pull on this one. Here's an O. There's an O. Here's an X. And there's the other X. And then let's just put a little bit of, I'm going to do some cartridge paper, so it's nice and lightweight. It won't pick up quite as nicely as the rice paper, but that's okay. It's all just about experimenting and playing, right? Oh, that's fun. That's pretty darn obvious too, isn't it? And let's go with this one. Now you notice I had a big block of magenta there in the middle. That's going to get picked up as well. That's okay. It'll look really interesting once we start to layer some other colors over top of it. Oh yeah, look at, you can see a little bit of the pattern from the mandala that got picked up underneath. Cool. All right, let's leave these down and then let's add some white over top. So there's kind of two ways you can work with stencils, right? You can either lay the stencils on top of the paint, or you can paint over top of the stencils. Got to be a little careful when you do this if you don't want the paint to get under the edge of the stencil, but that can lead to some pretty cool effects as well. That's it. I want a nice mixture of papers that have large shapes and small shapes, geometric and more organic. See, I'm getting a little bit of that pink mixing in with the white because it wasn't dry. That's okay. Mixing on the plate's always fun. And I do have a bit too much paint down here. You can see it's a little gloppy. That's all right. All right, let's try some of this more transparent paper. Notice that I don't worry about whether I'm getting the whole page on or not, because I'm going to come back time and time again, and I don't want this to pick up all of my paint, so I'm going to do it very, very, ooh, it's pretty, very, very light pressing, just enough to pick up the grooves. And that's very wet. Okay, we'll put those off to the side too. So I tend to go through all my papers and give a base layer, create a base layer on them. The stencils have to go off to the side now to dry, or just to not contaminate the rest of my work surface. That's quite pretty. Let's go back to a piece of cartridge paper here and try to pick up some of this. I think I might actually see if we can pick up most of it. So the easiest way to clean your plate while you still have wet paint on it is to put a piece of paper, press it down, and then wait for a couple of minutes until it's dried or close to dry. You can kind of feel it too from the paper. The back of the paper will feel cool if the paint is still wet underneath, and then it'll start to come to room temperature once the paint dries. just going to give a little peek. Oh, starting to come off, but not all of it. Let's try a little longer. Remember, anything that's left on the plate, it's going to get picked up by the paint that we add over top. Wow, that is kind of fun. Wasn't expecting all of those colors. Look at that. So pretty bold pink. And you've got bits of the mandala underneath. Got some white spots in the middle. We'll come back to that one later. Right, I'm ready to go in with a little bit of black, and I think we'll mix some colors here. Okay, just to get a little bit more variation. So I've got some black, and I'll throw some white down there as well. Of course, we all know what black and white makes. Get some kind of a gray or some kind of a silvery look. I'm just going to start by pulling that white paint down towards the bottom and then moving up into the black. I always love how this looks kind of blobby when you first start, and I've actually pulled papers that way before. That's kind of an interesting. Now let's go through and see if we can mix. I had a little bit more black than white. It's all right. Just get it as smooth as possible. Although, if you like a grungy look, it doesn't have to be an even distribution either. You notice I'm getting some interesting patterns down here. Whoops. As I bump into my camera stand. Let's go back to that mandala. Plop it down on the top. And I'm going to grab something to make some circles with. I want to move the paint just a little bit off the plate. So I'm going to make some circles here. There's really no paint underneath, so it'll be interesting to see how this affects what we pick up. Let's put a couple of different pieces on here. Let's go with some wet strength tissue, and then I'll finish the bottom off with a bit more of that light mixed media paper. Okay, so right away it's picking up. There we go. To get into all those little cracks and crevices of the stencil. Not always easy. And I'm not sure what we'll get down here. Let's pull this one first. Okay, very cool. So it picked up some of that paint that was underneath. I've got gray and I've got a little bit of that black and white. Love that. And then this one here. Interesting. So I've left some streaks of paint on the plate. It hasn't picked up in those areas. That's going to be really pretty later. All right, let's pick up the stencil. Might actually try laying it down again down here. We'll add a bit more paint to the whole thing. Let this dry just a tiny bit. Let's go with a little magenta. Well, I guess I didn't really let that dry, did I? Oh well, we'll see what happens. It's the thing I love the most about Gelli Plate. Work, it doesn't really matter. It all just makes for interesting patterns and textures on the paper. Such a cool noise, huh? See what happens. Got some blobs happening. Got that big band of magenta in the middle. I have learned that I actually do like having some plain solid colors on my papers. Once you start to do some collage work with them, you kind of appreciate the fact that not everything is a busy pattern with lots of color, that those solid bits give you some contrast in your collage compositions. Let's do another one of my favorites is to take my catalyst wedge and to draw some interesting shapes, or I think of these as kind of stalks. Wipe it on my apron. And then I'm going to grab a bit of this textured paper. Remember I showed you this? Those really cool lines in it. I think that could be a really interesting thing to do here. Let's go half and half. And then we'll have that other paper to work with later. All the way down. What have I got over here? Should we see what happens if we add, which way is it going to go? I guess this way. Don't think it really matters. That's it. Over top of the line work of that pattern page. Now see, I have little lines and bubbles in my tissue paper as I lay it down. So I'm not going to get a really beautiful smooth pattern on it, but that's okay. It makes it more interesting. Okay, let's pull this one up. Oof. That's really cool. I like how you can see the paper through the pattern. Same here. Really nice sort of curvilinear shapes. Remember, I left the stencil down, so I'm going to take that off. Lots of paint still on there. I'm going to come back to a piece of paper that we've used already. It's got some hearts on it. And I'm going to place it down here. And we're going to pick up whatever's on that plate there. Right to the edges. Although I really like sometimes how you get these little rectangular edges around the side of your jelly plate. Okay, pull that one. And you have to be very careful of the paper here. It doesn't tear. See, we've got remnants of those lines and now more of that stencil bit over the black and white. Really lovely. I need some porous paper here to get this last little bit off. So I'm going to go back to the rice paper. It really picks up the paint well and it doesn't tear when you're pulling it off, which I like. It also gives you a nice opaque paper to work with later when you're building new things from it. Okay, so not much picked up there. You can see it's all fairly dry on that page. That means it's time to add solid color. Go back and see if we can pick it up. I'm just going to pick up whatever last little bit I can over here. Yeah, not much. So it's pretty dry. Let's go in and add the white. So I'm going to add enough here that I can pull all of that color off of the plate with one pull, ideally. I say ideally because, you know, best laid plans when it comes to. And here's what that paper looked like once I waited for it to dry and pulled it off. And this is probably my favorite paper of all the ones that we've made so far today. Lots of interesting textures and colors, and I can see that it's going to be a lot of fun to cut into shapes and apply to my collage. And about an hour and a half later, here's what we ended up with. Lots of visual contrast in color, in shape, in pattern, and in size. Looking forward to starting to work with these really gorgeous textured papers tomorrow. Thanks so much for following along with my collage paper making journey. If you'd like to know what I do with these papers, you can follow my website, tamaragrand.com, or have a look at my Instagram at tamaragrandart. Please also like and subscribe if you'd like to be notified next time I post a video to YouTube. Have a great day.